Life seemed to be going smoothly, or so we thought. Betty smirking next to my mother-in-law. Who could have seen this coming? My name is Polly. I'm 35 and work for a major corporation. My husband Emmett is a colleague, and we continue to work at the same company after getting married. My in-laws are kind and often look out for me, especially when I'm busy with work. The idea of multi-generational living came from them. Apparently, they had planned to give the land to Emmett, but we decided to build a new house on the property to avoid stepping on each other's toes. I was grateful for the suggestion and agreed to the multi-generational living arrangement. We renovated an abandoned guest house and moved in. Both of us had good jobs, so we have plenty of savings. We incorporated all of our wishes into the renovation. The guest house was old but had a good design, so we mostly just reinforced it. My in-laws were pleased with the outcome. After moving in, we'd enjoy tea together on weekends. Then, suddenly, my father-in-law collapsed. I heard he was rushed to the hospital, so I left work early. When I arrived, he was hooked up to numerous tubes.
Dad, hang in there. Wake up.
In the hospital room, Emmett, who had arrived before me, was desperately talking to his father. Both my mother-in-law and Leroy's family had arrived, and the room was filled with Emmett's cries and the sound of the heart monitor. A doctor came in and explained my father-in-law's condition. According to the doctor, he had suffered a stroke. He was in critical condition, on the brink of death, but they arranged for a transfer to a larger hospital. Then father-in-law went to the largest general hospital in the state. Despite the best efforts there, he never recovered. My father-in-law passed away without ever waking up. The sight of Emmett and Leroy sobbing uncontrollably still haunts me. My mother-in-law, having lost her beloved husband, became increasingly reclusive. For about 6 months, Emmett and I increased our work-from-home days to be with her as much as possible. But she insisted she was fine, so we gradually returned to our regular work schedules. In contrast, Betty started visiting my in-laws' house more frequently. She and Leroy had gotten married suddenly a year before my father-in-law passed away. It was a whirlwind romance leading to a quick marriage. After just 6 months of dating, Betty, who was only in her 2nd year of working, quit her job to become a housewife. My in-laws were thrilled about the birth of their grandchildren. They had prepared many gifts. Betty seemed pleased and would boast about it whenever we met at the main house. Emmett and I hadn't been blessed with children since our marriage, but we never felt pressured as we loved our jobs and had each other, and my in-laws never rushed us. Seeing this, Betty always seemed to smirk triumphantly. Moreover, it seemed that my father-in-law and Betty didn't get along. He was old-fashioned and often engaged in physical contact. It was usually innocent, like patting on the back or stroking the head, which I found comforting, but Betty seemed to feel differently. So Betty avoided coming to my in-laws' house because she didn't like my father-in-law, and when she did come, she was cold to him. At first, my father-in-law would show up to see the grandkids, but he seemed to grow tired of her attitude. Eventually, he started avoiding Betty, staying in his room whenever she visited. And now, Betty was visiting frequently, targeting times when we were at work. I had a bad feeling about it, but Emmett saw it differently.
Maybe she's just trying to keep Mom company. Mom's alone during the day, and she's happy to see the grandkids,
he said. Emmett had a point, so I pushed down my concerns and carried on with life. 6 months passed, and the anniversary of my father-in-law's death was approaching. We were called over by my mother-in-law and received shocking news. You know Leroy changed jobs, right? But it seems he's not making much in terms of salary or bonuses. Betty seems to be struggling too. We were puzzled by this sudden conversation. So you two both have jobs, right? And no kids, so you have some flexibility. I'd like you to give the guest house to Leroy and his wife. We were stunned. This had been Betty's plan all along. She must have spent the last 6 months convincing my mother-in-law. Indeed, Leroy had changed jobs about a year before my father-in-law passed away due to a layoff. It happened while Betty was pregnant, and the reason for layoff was downsizing. Leroy struggled to find a new job for about 3 months. Eventually, he took a job at a small company, thanks to a referral from my father-in-law. Emmett, who usually doesn't talk much about Leroy, seemed relieved. He must have been worried about Leroy's situation. It's true that our dual-income household has more financial flexibility, and it's also true that we don't have kids. But the suddenness of it all left us bewildered. Emmett expressed this to my mother-in-law.
It's hard to just give up the house we renovated.
I understand. That's why I'll cover the renovation costs. With that, we were left speechless. My mother-in-law decided to give the money to Emmett in exchange for giving the house to Leroy. We needed to talk to Leroy to move things forward. So we arranged a meeting for the weekend. Little did we know we were in for another shock. We've told Emmett and Polly that we plan to give you the guest house. Don't worry, brother-in-law and sister-in-law. If you give us the guest house, I'll take care of all the housework and caregiving for mother-in-law. Leave it to me. Betty started speaking confidently, and Leroy seemed to agree.
Well, if you're going to go that far, we do have some financial flexibility, and if it's for the sake of living, we can't say no. But we can't move out immediately. We both have jobs, so we need to find a new place and move. Let's say we need 3 months. Leroy and Betty can move in after that.
I nodded at Emmett's words. My mother-in-law seemed to have no objections. If Betty was going to handle the housework and caregiving, I had no reason to oppose. But Betty's next words left us all stunned. Wait, you guys are moving into the main house, right? What? Not just my mother-in-law, but everyone in the room was shocked. We were left speechless, not understanding the meaning of her words. Ignoring our reactions, Betty continued excitedly. So, you guys will live in the main house. I'll take care of your share of the housework and get a gratuity from you. That way, I'll have some income and you'll be relieved of chores. It's a win-win situation. Here's how Betty laid it out. First, we would live with my mother-in-law in the main house. Leroy and his family would live in the guest house. Betty would come to the main house every day to do chores. In return, we would pay her. The guest house was mortgage-free, so no rent was needed. As for why she wouldn't live with my mother-in-law, she said it was easier to avoid conflicts and that the guest house was better suited for raising kids. I got a headache from her selfishness. It seems like this was news to my mother-in-law as well. She thought she would be living alone while Leroy's family moved into the guest house.
So, how much should we pay you in gratuity?
Emmett asked. I knew you'd understand. You don't have to pay much since we're family. Maybe around $2,500. That should be enough. You guys get to relax. Mother-in-law gets to see the grandkids every day, and our lives get easier. Everything is settled. Isn't it perfect? I couldn't understand why we should pay $2,500. Emmett was visibly shaking with anger. Leroy seemed surprised too.
Wait a minute, I didn't know about this gratuity thing,
he said. What? Really? But we're talking about it now, so it's okay, right? Betty answered, looking puzzled. Leroy sighed but didn't press the issue, suggesting he wasn't entirely against the idea.
Perfect, huh? Perfectly stupid,
Emmett said, making Betty's face tense up. Emmett continued talking.
Why should we not only give up the guest house, but also pay $2,500 a month? And since when is that a family rate?
Tears welled up in Betty's eyes. She muttered something and then responded, crying. Why can't you understand? Everyone benefits. Mother-in-law won't be lonely and you guys get to relax. I can't work outside because I have a baby, and this baby is the only one in this family. Aren't babies supposed to be raised by everyone?
Put the baby aside. You could use daycare,
Emmett said. Betty burst into tears, her shrill voice filling the room. Why would you say that? I can't send my son to such a barbaric place. What's wrong with wanting to be with him until he's old enough for preschool? Betty started sobbing like a child. Emmett and I watched in disbelief, but my mother-in-law seemed to sympathize with Betty. Betty has thought this through. I'm okay with living with you guys. If Betty takes care of the housework, it'll be easier for everyone. Family should help each other, right? It seems my mother-in-law had been completely won over by Betty in the past 6 months. Leroy, rubbing Betty's back, looked at us pleadingly. Betty was crying with her face down, but I saw a smile through the gaps in her fingers. Men don't understand the hardships of housework, but you get it, right? It'll be easier and cheaper for everyone, Betty said, looking at me. I responded with a smile. Yes, I agree with Emmett. Did you know? Housework for 2 people isn't that big of a deal. And $2,500, no offense, but I don't think your housework is worth that much. She seemed to have not expected a refusal. Betty stared at me, dumbfounded. Emmett sighed deeply and said to the 3 of them,
Fine, we'll move out of the guest house, but we're not moving into the main house. Do whatever you want with the guest house after we leave. You don't have to return the renovation costs. But from now on, no financial support. Figure it out yourselves.
Emmett left the room after saying that. I followed him, saying my goodbyes.
Polly, I'm sorry for the trouble. About the renovation costs, too.
Don't worry about it. Let's just find a new place and move out. We went straight to a real estate broker and started looking for a new home. Fortunately, we found a great place to live within a week. It's a luxury condominium with strict approval criteria. But after the real estate broker learned where we worked, he recommended we apply. We passed with flying colors and could move in a month. Leroy's family moved into the guest house after we left. But even with Leroy's income and mother-in-law's pension, they were struggling financially. As for Betty, she only did housework in the main house for about a month. After that, she left her child with someone else and went out, not even taking care of her own home. When we heard Betty's itemized $2,500 bill, by the way, we had a good laugh. $300 per person, multiplied by 6 family members equaled $1,800. Additional charges for non-food expenses. The remaining $700 was pure gratuity for Betty, basically her allowance. Why on earth would we need to pay Betty's allowance? Emmett and I looked at each other and laughed at her ridiculous itemization. We later heard that Betty used to be a plant on a dating app. She continued this even after marriage to make some extra money, but Leroy found out and suspected her of cheating, so she quit. Since then, Leroy has forbidden Betty from working. As a result, Betty has no pocket money. So Betty thought she could get gratuity from us. Her plans for the money? teas, spa treatments, and buying brand name items. We were amazed at her vanity. Still, Leroy has no plans to divorce her. We decided that after moving, we would only visit for New Year's celebrations and father-in-law's death anniversary. She sometimes hints at living together, but Emmett and I both brilliantly ignore it. Mother-in-law doesn't push too hard, perhaps sensing the awkwardness. In our new home, we decided to upgrade all our appliances. Robot vacuum, washing machine with dryer, and AI-controlled devices. All these cost less than 6 months of Betty's proposed gratuity. Housework became much easier, and we enjoyed our time more. Soon after moving, I found out I was pregnant. We'll be a family of 3 next year. I plan to continue working. So, how do I know about their current situation? Simple. Betty calls us almost weekly, hoping for our sympathy, which we don't have. Still, Betty didn't hesitate to call me, and I answered in a cheerful voice. I cheerfully told her, "Our child is expected to be a girl, so she won't be a playmate for your son. Plus, we plan to send her to daycare. We're also budgeting for her education, so we can't help with your childcare. Please manage on your own." I hung up while Betty was still talking. She called back several times, but I ignored her. We haven't told Betty or mother-in-law, but we've moved a plane ride away. Emmett accepted a promotion at the headquarters that he had previously declined. I'm also transferring to a different department at the headquarters. I'm grateful that I can take maternity and parental leave. Mother-in-law and Betty probably think we moved nearby because we left a local condominium brochure at mother-in-law's house. I wonder how Betty will react when she finds out the truth. Unless we visit them, we won't have to deal with them anymore. I secretly look forward to seeing their faces the next time we visit. After sipping some decaffeinated tea, I deleted mother-in-law and Betty's contact information. From now on, we'll focus on our important family, doing our best in housework, childcare, and, of course, our